Good morning. My name is Francis Kemausuor. I'm an associate professor at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. I'm also the director of the Burhamon Energy Center at the same university. My presentation is on the assessment of microgrid policy and regulation in Ghana. The outline will be as follows. I'll look at the energy situation in rural Ghana and then move on to status of mini-grids in Ghana today, look at the policy and regulatory situation with regards to mini-grids, look at some gaps and concerns that have been expressed, and then make some policy recommendations. As of 2019, about 85% of Ghana's population have access to electricity, and this is mainly grid electricity. Ghana is recorded to have one of the highest access to electrification in sub-Saharan Africa, and in fact, in West Africa, Ghana has the highest access to electrification. However, there is significant difference between access rate in urban areas and those in rural areas. Most urban communities have virtually achieved universal access to electricity. However, in rural communities, there are some 30% or so that do not have access to electricity at the moment. And access is particularly very low in island and lakeside communities, which have been created by the Volta Lake. And a population of approximately 3 million people reside in these communities. Extending electricity to these island communities is expensive using the grid extension because then you would have to use underwater cables, which admittedly are very expensive globally. Now, this become a major hurdle to achieve Ghana's plan of universal access to electricity, because to achieve universal access, we must necessarily also connect grid island and lakeside communities through electricity. But apart from the island and lakeside communities, there are also some very remote rural communities which are far from the grid. These are mainly in the northern parts of the country, where there are low population densities in many of these communities, and they are also quite remote from the grid. And they have low demand also, and having low demand means it becomes difficult to connect them to the grid over several kilometers. In view of this, government has begun piloting mini-grids and intends to construct more as part of efforts in Ghana to achieve that last mile electrification. But in all of this, it appears that the government wants to go the utility model only, and there is very little space so far for the private sector to operate. So this presentation is looking at the extent to which the policy and the regulatory environment is geared towards encouraging the participation of various stakeholders in the sector, especially private sector operators. At the moment, government has constructed 5 mini-grids on island communities in the country as a pilot, and we are learning from these pilot systems to be able to extend mini-grids to other island communities. There's been activity from some of our development partners who are assisting with various studies, feasibility planning, etc., in order to make the environment fertile so that government could construct some more mini-grids on these islands. There is limited private sector involvement at the moment, but there is one company called Black Star Energy that currently operates 17 very small mini-grids that provide access to about 6,000 customers in total in the Ashanti and Brong-Ahafo regions. These are in the middle belts and mainly forested areas of Ghana. Now, in order to have a very good mini-grid policy, there are some key ingredients that are required. And one of these is whether or not to integrate mini-grids as a rural electrification option. The other key ingredient is which strategic approach to utilize, whether to go the centralized way or to decentralize mini-grids. The third one is how to finance mini-grids, whether it will come from the government or from the private sector, and which electricity tariffs to apply for mini-grid customers. In Ghana today, the policy is such a way that mini-grids have been mainstreamed into our national electrification scheme, and are seen as an important element of pro-poor policies for rural electrification. So the end game is not really value for money, but looking at extending electricity to poor communities so they can also enhance their social activities, but also to use energy for productive purposes and then to enhance their income. In view of this, there is zero connection fee for mini-grid customers, and there is a uniform pricing tariff for both residential and non-residential customers. Now, this happens across the country, and it's also the same for mini-grid communities. There are institutions that have been mandated to provide different support services for mini-grid electrification. The Ministry of Finance and Energy are in charge of financing and policy. Then there are regulatory agencies like the Energy Commission, which is the technical regulator. The Public Utility Regulatory Commission deals with tariff issues. The Ghana Standards Board is in charge of standards of the different components of mini-grid electrification, solar panels, inverters, batteries, etc. And then the Environmental Protection Agency takes care of environmental issues. When it comes to generation and distribution, we have the public utilities, the Volta River Authority, the Bui Power Authority, who are generators, and then the distribution companies, the Electricity Company of Ghana and the Northern Electricity Distribution Company. Government plans to scale up mini-grids as part of plans to extend electricity to especially our island communities. Now, there are plans to construct 55 renewable energy-based mini-grids by 2020 as part of the Scaling Up Renewable Energy Program, that is SREP. And then also in 2019, we published a Renewable Energy Master Plan, which is targeting at least 300 mini-grids by 2030. So these are all plans to expand the mini-grid program so that island and lakeside communities could have access to electricity. A draft mini-grid regulation was published a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, it has remained in the draft stage, and we are not sure when this will become operational. But the draft had some of these issues. Generation capacity was limited to 1 megawatt. Operators will require a license to operate. There's a special permission required if the grid is expected to reach the community within 2 years. There is an agreement needed between the developer and members of the community in which the developer is planning to set up a mini-grid system. There must be evidence of land leased for the purpose, and at least 70% of electricity in a calendar year must come from renewable energy sources. Of course, it must conform with standards to enable possible connection to the distribution grid, and only approved uniform tariffs must be charged, and these are approved by the Public Utility Regulatory Commission. But there are some gaps and concerns, especially with tariff issues, and then also how private sector could be engaged. Admittedly, mini-grids are expensive, and so there must be innovative ways to recover costs when you do this. In our draft mini-grid regulation, the uniform tariff structure, which is in the government policy, is echoed, which means that there is no other tariff option available for private sector operators. But then the World Bank has suggested that mini-grid operators should be allowed the freedom to propose appropriate tariffs that would make business sense for them as private sector operators. So whether they want to go the flat rate, the energy charge, the demand charge, or any other innovative forms of tariff structures that they could propose, which of course will have to be approved by the regulatory authority. They should be given the freedom to do this. And we also know that tariffs are sensitive to various factors. This includes the location for the plant, the source of the fuel for the plant, the distribution capacity, the number of customers, so that mini-grids in larger communities could be cheaper per unit than mini-grids in much smaller communities, depending on all the variables in play. With regards to private sector contents, there appears to be very little role for the private sector in Ghana's mini-grid program. Currently, they are limited to construction and consultancy services. So they could be hired by the utilities to do construction for them. But beyond that, they have no further role to play. And we think that the policy has not been publicized widely enough so that many stakeholders are not aware of development in the sector and the role they can play to facilitate the process. Private sector participation, we think, could speed up the rate of expansion of mini-grids so that instead of government doing this alone, the private sector could complement their efforts, and we could do this at a much faster rate than is currently happening. We have looked at models in other countries, some African countries and other countries outside of Africa, and we have seen that they combine both the government or utility model and the private sector model to operate their mini-grid so that expansion is then faster. Government of Ghana says that because our electrification rates are high, they think that it's okay to go the utility sector, the utility model, so that mini-grid customers on islands and remote communities could enjoy uniform tariffs. But then, I mean, this is not the case in other countries. But of course, those other countries have lower access rates than Ghana currently have. So we are making some policy recommendations, and we think that there must be a clear definition of what role the private sector can play. It looks like government is still adamant. They want to still go the utility way, but we think that there should be something for the private sector to do to fast track the process of mini-grid interventions so that they should be able to not only construct for the utility people, but they should also be able to own, to operate, and then to maintain mini-grids in some defined spaces that they should be given in the country. And in doing that, the policy must indicate how they would be compensated, because obviously they can't charge uniform tariffs and still remain in business. So we are proposing that government can use especially cross-subsidy systems to attract the private sector to help in the mini-grid program. We think that if our peak consumption should reach 5,000 megawatts by 2030, and we have some 300 to 500 mini-grids at average capacity of about 100 kilowatts, this will contribute just up to about 1% of our total capacity installation. And doing a cross-subsidy program with just 1% where the generation costs are much higher, we think this shouldn't affect the tariff structure very much. And we should find ways to really use these cross-subsidy systems to attract the private sector to support so that the program could move faster. We also think that all the mini-grid communities should be mapped. So we should map out communities that are qualified for mini-grids and then use that to prepare an integrated and comprehensive last-mile electrification plan for Ghana that harmonizes plans for both grid extension and mini-grids. Then we can conduct some baseline studies that would help us to prepare all the communities that must be connected to mini-grids, looking at the different characteristics like population, number of households, expected date for the grid extension to such communities, and some other information that are relevant so that we could use this to then indicate priority areas where government would want to tackle and areas that the private sector could access, even if it's on a pilot basis, so that gradually we can see how the private sector could also support some of these mini-grid programs and then help government to arrive much faster at the destination that they intend for mini-grid programs in Ghana. Thank you very much.